This podcast includes graphic depictions of sensitive material. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome back to Thin Blue Lies, the only anti-capitalist true crime podcast talking about crimes committed by police. I'm your host, Sal, and I'm here with S4A. Today we're going to be talking about cops and residences.
Yeah. Like that.
No-knock warrants, qualified immunity, civil forfeiture, all wrapped up in this nasty package that we have to deal with every day. So we're going to talk about three specific cases today: Vicki Baker, Leo Lech, and Onree Norris. Buckle your seatbelts, folks, because we're in for a ride. Vicki Baker, in 2020, was selling her McKinney home on Vista Verde Trail in Texas. She had bought that home in 2007. She had just sold it. Okay. Her daughter, Deanna, was there to prepare the house for sale. And while she was there, Wesley Little showed up, who is a 50-year-old man who had done a little bit of handiwork at their house a year prior. So he shows up at the doorstep with a 15-year-old girl, kind of shoves himself in, and Deanna's like, oh, that's fine. I have to go to the store. She knows that, like, something's up, but she's not going to stay. So she's like, I'm going to go to the Walmart. So she runs out, immediately calls the cops. And the McKinney police met her at the Walmart parking lot. She gave them the code to the front door and the garage door opener. That's pretty important, right? They had access to the house. And Vicki made sure to tell them, please do not destroy my house. I have it sold. It's like already sold. I just need him out. Like, that's what we need to happen. Well, they definitely didn't do that. So McKinney SWAT went to her house and took down her back fence with a Bearcat, or an armored vehicle. They shot about 30 tier fuel canisters into the home and onto the property that still had her dog inside. They ripped her front door open and off. They blew up her garage door despite being given the opener and had all the keys. And all this damage left the house uninhabitable. The dog was left blind and deaf after what SWAT did to him. Yeah, so the dog was blind and deaf now. So the damage to the house totaled $50,000, according to a lawsuit that Baker filed in March 2021. At the time, the city and Baker's homeowner's insurance company told her that the police had immunity, qualified immunity, which we all know. S4A, can you describe what qualified immunity is?
Yeah. So qualified immunity is it's a type of legal immunity that is given to certain state actors so that they can reasonably conduct their duties, which are often unpopular, without constantly having legal actions brought against them in a private capacity. There's a certain amount of this that any government needs in order to conduct its business, but it's being increasingly used in cases it's creating an atmosphere of complete legal unaccountability for cops who are just increasingly becoming, what was the quote I got while watching stuff before this podcast from a former cop? A lawless gang with no supervision. I think that pretty much sums it up. But if you look even at the American Bar Association, major legal group in the U.S., they had this to write about it. So they said, quote, "The substance of constitutional rights is meaningless if state actors can violate those rights with impunity. Such rights would become, in James Madison's words, parchment barriers, symbolic commitments to individual liberty that do nothing in practice to deter or prevent unlawful misconduct by government agents. Unfortunately, most members of law enforcement operate today in a culture of near zero accountability. Police officers rarely face meaningful consequences for their misconduct, and the public's accurate perception of this fact has contributed to what can best be described as a crisis of confidence in our nation's law enforcement. So, in other words, it's entirely possible and quite common for courts to hold that government agents did violate someone's rights, but that the victim just has no legal remedy, simply because that precise sort of misconduct, like whatever specifically they did, hasn't occurred in past cases. So they quote Don Willett, a federal judge on the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. To some observers, qualified immunity smacks of unqualified impunity, letting public officials duck consequences for their bad behavior, no matter how palpably unreasonable, as long as they were the first to behave badly in that particular way. So yeah, there's a need to shield officials from harassment and liability when they are going about whatever their duties are. Um, but what we're getting in a lot of these cases is some harm is done, some wrong is committed against a person, you know, in most of the cases that we're going to be looking at, a property owner, like a house, you know, like a residence specifically. And so the cops go in for whatever reason. Maybe they have a warrant, maybe they don't. Maybe they have a no-knock warrant and just bust down the door.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and there's a lot of damage done. Maybe they're at the wrong house, as very, very often happens for a variety of reasons. But when all is said and done, there's a lot of damage left over. Maybe people got killed. That can be police. That can be people who are in the house. As you know, I think we know the cases like Breonna Taylor, Amir Locke. I mean, it goes on and on and on. If you start watching this stuff on YouTube, literally there's just an endless list. Um, but yeah, people die, things get broken, people get injured, and will the city pay for it? Because the cops are working, obviously, for the city government, or sometimes the state government, or whatever. If that government won't pay for the damage done or the, you know, injuries that were, you know, they won't make it right, then the people try to go after the cops, and they can't because there's qualified immunity. And so we're just left with a situation where, you know, nobody's accountable for what is done by these police. And in many cases, there are glaring, I mean, just as far as a question of fault, there's not even a question. Things were done wrong from just the get-go. Leaving aside, I mean, questions of sort of social justice and is this even the system that we should have? But even within the rules of the system, they didn't even like follow a single thing that they were supposed to, and yet, you know, people don't get compensation or whatever.
The city filed a motion 1 month later to dismiss Baker's claims for lack of subject matter jurisdiction, according to a ruling in the U.S. District Court of the Eastern District of Texas. Luckily, federal court ruled in late 2021 that Baker could pursue legal action against the city. The Institute for Justice helped her, and on April 29th, Judge Mazin rejected the city of McKinney's argument that police action should be categorically exempt from the general requirement that government pay for property it destroys, holding that the argument rests on the untenable analysis of police power and eminent domain. So thank God in this one particular case, they didn't completely screw her out of like her retirement. You know, she's retirement age, going to sell her home and trying to, you know, live out the rest of her days on the money she made. And she can't do that because there is no money because they fucking destroyed her house. Like, Jesus. Intentional and foreseeable, the compensation was required, you know, because they like, she gave them the keys to the house and the garage door opener, and they still destroyed it.
Yeah, this is just too often the case. And that the point about the garage door opener, it suggests a certain I don't know if malice is too strong, but this is something you see in many cases like this, where the police they'll be granted access to, you know, the various rooms that they say that they need to get to. They'll have a key. they'll be able to get in without causing any damage, and yet they cause the damage anyway. I think it's clear that this is part of an intimidation campaign, and it's across the US. I mean, when I was looking, just again, trying to look not just at the cases that we are going to highlight in the show, but trying to get a sense of more of the background. I mean, it's cases in Minnesota, Texas, Maryland, Tennessee, Georgia, Colorado, Arizona, Pennsylvania. I mean, you can basically just list every state.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of it going on in Texas, but which I didn't have time to dig more deeply into what specifically is going on in Texas, but a lot of cases. But I mean, it's I I don't know. I mean, it's the tip of an iceberg of something much larger about the culture of policing in the United States. Again, you look at some of these cases, there's not even some of the basic due diligence or basic, police work done. Cases where a suspect was being sought by police and they go in and crash. It turns out to be the wrong address. Why? Because the suspect hadn't lived there for over a year and things like that. And yet people are signing off on these search warrants.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at least in the cases where they have search warrants, because there's also plenty of cases where they don't bother to get one and they just make up some exigency kind of, well, we thought that we saw the person, run into your backyard.
We
But
smelled
again, the
marijuana.
accountability. Yeah, so it comes back to the accountability of like, well, these aren't isolated cases. This is an epidemic of violence and injustice going on across the U.S. Where does it stop? And what's enabling it? First, you have the no-knock warrants. You have the qualified immunity as a legal doctrine, which is basically unlawful according to the ABA. Where do we go from here? But I don't want to get ahead of us.
Yeah, so Vicky's insurance company refused to pay for the damage caused by the government, but luckily the jury, the federal jury, found that they gave her 59,000 basically for it, which was pretty good since many people get rewarded a single dollar for their property that was taken or destroyed as a fuck you from the police. So I'm really surprised that she did actually get a payment back because the other people that you're going to hear did not.
Yeah, relatively speaking, that's definitely a happy ending.
Yes.
I mean, compared to, there's an example from 2015 in Colorado. So basically, June 3rd and 4th, 2015, a SWAT team. This is kind of a crazy story. So this is the story of Leo, Alfonsina, and John Lech. They had a house. It was worth about $580,000. And the police thought that there was a shoplifter who may have been armed. Now, in the case of Vicki Baker, there was like child endangerment involved, at least initially.
Yeah.
Um,
They got her out
yeah, so
though.
like exactly, yeah, the child had been released like hours prior. The guy said that he wasn't, that basically he wasn't coming out, like he felt trapped and was like, anyway, he didn't want to come out alive. So they anyway proceeded to do mass damage to the house. But in this case, it's a shoplifter. So I have a story pulled up. This is from actually, kind of a lot written about this case, but one from USA Today. The headline is "Police destroyed an innocent man's home during an arrest, but he's owed nothing." Court rules. So I guess the ruling came a few years later in fall of 2019. But to read from some of this, a federal appeals court says that a Colorado town is not liable for damage after police destroyed an innocent man's home during a long siege to arrest a suspected shoplifter who had randomly taken refuge there. So basically, guy shoplifting, I want to say it was from a Walmart, but I could be making that up or misremembering. Anyway, police are pursuing the shoplifter who they believe may have been armed. The guy just takes refuge in like some random house he decides to hide in. and the police blew it up. I mean, the place was obliterated. And again, it's a house worth almost $600,000. Long story short, the city of Greenwood Village said in a statement that it had offered to pay Lech $5,000 for temporary living expenses. And it also said that a review of the incident by the National Tactical Officers Association found that police acted in a quote highly commendable manner. So the guy's insurance paid $345,000, even though the house was appraised at $560,000. Eventually, he took out like a second mortgage and then rebuilt the house.
God.
But yeah, so the insurance just wouldn't cover it because they don't cover police blew up my house. And then a unanimous ruling in 2019 by a three-judge panel for the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals upheld a federal district court finding that the city does not owe him
And
money.
that's why,
It said,
like,
yeah,
I always say there's going to be a special place in hell for judges because fuck them judges too.
yeah. I mean, well, and that's who's signing the search warrants too. I mean,
Hmm.
the Lech case is not a case involving a search warrant. That was one of these like suspect randomly ran into your house kind of things.
Yeah.
Talk about bad luck. I mean, sometimes people get like a raccoon in their garage or, like some bats hibernating in their attic. But no, you happen to get the, armed shoplifter that, you know,
And in a normal society,
yes, exactly.
what do you think is the recourse? Oh, we destroyed your home like because there was a danger and so we will pay for your home. But no. That's not what fucking happens. They destroy your home and they say fuck you.
Yeah, it almost seems like you don't matter at all.
Mhm.
There's a clip going around now of Walmart. Um, that's basically saying like, oh, they're suffering from a lot of shoplifting right now. Guess why? Nobody has any money to buy anything, and prices are insane. I would guess at a system-wide level, structural level, that's what's going on. And so anyway, there's more theft. And so Walmart is basically trying to go in there and get different legislation, and they're trying to get bigger police presence and stuff like that. But this is eventually where that goes. People who like had a house and they had and you could I mean these are people who happen to have enough money or get a deal where they're able to afford their house. This could have easily happened in an apartment building or something else as well.
Right.
But basically at the end of the day, what matters to the people who control the system and whose police it is, the capitalist government that runs all this stuff. At the end of the day, what they're concerned about is sending the message that even if you just shoplifted from some box store, that is more important to the system than your life, your house, even somebody else's house if you happen to run in there.
Mhm.
And so these are the values being communicated to people in the society today. I think the crisis of confidence is just scratching the surface.
For real. Yeah. Sorry, I just ugh, such a ridiculous thing that they can just do this without anything, no consequences whatsoever.
I mean that seems to be the refrain so far. Is like again, video after video after video. It's just like there is no recourse to this. And even people who got murdered, once in a great while, if there's like tremendous community pressure, um, you may get some like ruling of manslaughter or something like that.
Right, but
But
most of the
it's an
time,
enormous
nothing
fight even to
happens
get
to
that.
these cops. Yeah, nothing.
It's a huge fight, even to make it an issue in the first place.
Right.
Like in the case of Amir Locke, who was staying at somebody's house. He didn't even live there. There was a no-knock warrant executed. He was sleeping on the couch. I guess, stood up too quick, quote, officer felt threatened, and bang. And like that was that. So again, some stuff like this cannot go on indefinitely in a society. I mean, it's a society. This isn't sustainable in any way. Something has to give eventually.
Right. And what is the American dream? What is the American dream? It's just, it's not like being rich. It's having your own little place that nobody can hurt you. Your own tiny castle, right? Is that not the American dream? And that's not even an option anymore, because you can be murdered in your own home. They can destroy your home, and they will, nothing will happen to them, and everything bad will happen to you.
Yeah, the word stability, when you ask what the American dream is, the word stability comes to mind. Um, I mean, you can get into the particular nuances of like the white picket fence or whatever,
Mm.
but I think that like what most people want is a life
Stability.
where, their needs are met and they can kind of reasonably predict from day to day their, safety and well-being. And
Exactly.
that's what when you listen to interviews of people who had, the cops bust in on them, especially when they're at the wrong house and they're like raiding their house and maybe a family member gets killed or injured and,
Mm.
family heirlooms are being destroyed. Um, After when they get interviewed afterwards and their neighbors say the same things, it's like
It's
I think about
terrifying.
this constantly. They're traumatized.
Yeah. And that's the same. That's the case for Onree Norris, who was just living out in the woods in his Georgia home when the police, more than a dozen or 2 dozen officers, are executing a no-knock warrant. And in the body cam footage, you can see the house that they are meant to go into. They walk right fucking past the house that they're supposed to go in, and they walk to Onree Norris's house instead because they're at the wrong place. They don't know where they're going, which happens a lot. And they smash his door open with a battering ram and toss a flash grenade inside. Officers stormed in with guns drawn and subdued Onree Norris, who was literally just sitting there watching TV in his home. And they forced him down on the ground. That wasn't the
He's
guy who they
78,
were. Yeah, he's 78 years old,
yeah, 78
African
years old.
American grandfather with heart problems. Like, they could have killed him by the battering ram. Like, they could have scared him to death. Like, I'm not even kidding. And all the other stuff that they did, the what's it called? The flash grenades inside somebody's home, forcing him on the ground. Yeah.
He said it sounded like a bomb went off. And what you were saying before about them like not being able to find the house, so there's body cam footage, it's available online that you can watch. So the cops get lost. They're using an app to find the address. They get lost, they have to pull over, they don't know where they're going. And then when they do pull up the driveway, the cops are saying to each other, "Where's the fucking house? Where's the fucking house?" Like they are aware that they do not know where they're going.
And they don't
And
care.
they
They
proceed
push
on.
forward
No, they don't.
anyways. They push
Absolutely.
forward anyways. They walked
Yeah.
right past the house that they were supposed to go into, and they busted down Henri's house. So he said that he was just watching TV in his bedroom when he heard a thunderous sound. Um, because they had just knocked down the what's it called, the Henry County Sheriff Office Special Response Team had just knocked down all three of his fucking doors of his house at the same time. Can you imagine how frightening that is? He has never even had a fucking parking ticket. And
Yeah,
this is
and
what.
you can hear the cops too. They're screaming. They're yelling at the top of their lungs
Oh
at him.
yeah,
It's a tiny little house. I mean, it's like, I mean, it's a very, very modest house. Like,
in the middle of the
shack,
woods
shack
too.
is not quite it. Yeah, but it's like this was, I mean, it's kind of poor. Like it was,
Yeah.
it was a very small little like cottage type place,
Mhm.
and they're kicking the doors off the hinges and just screaming at the guy, and you see him with his hands up. What the
Oh
hell
yeah,
is
his
this?
hands were shaking. He was terrified, as
Yeah.
anyone would be in this situation, you know? So when he moved into the hallway, he was greeted by multiple officers wearing military-style gear, pointing assault rifles at him, who threw him onto the floor. Until that day when police mistakenly broke down his door, Norris had never had any trouble with the law. But since his next-door neighbor turned out to be a drug dealer, Norris was effectively punished for the police mistakes. Rightfully calling a raid a blatant constitutional violation, Norris initially sued multiple officers as well as Captain David Cody, Buck David Cody, who led the Henry SRT and exercised overall tactical control for the no-knock raid. But the other officers were soon shielded, dun, 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 by qualified immunity, leaving the captain as the sole defendant. As Norris said in the complaint, Captain Cody did not check to make sure Henry SRT members were going to the correct address or otherwise perform adequate precautionary measures to ensure a search warrant was properly executed. Although the captain did review the search warrant, he admitted he didn't read it all the way through. He didn't even read it. He didn't even fucking read it. So he didn't know the property's description because he didn't fucking read it. For instance, the no-knock warrant described the suspect living at 305 English Road, which has off-white siding and a black roof. In contrast, Norris's home, 303 English Road, which he had owned more than half a century, is yellow with a gray roof. Despite those clear differences, footage from 8 separate body cameras showed that the officers walked right fucking past the correct house and headed towards Norris's home instead. Even when the officers began raiding Norris's home, Captain Cody later testified he just wasn't sure that the second house was actually their target. So he assumed his subordinates acquired the information justifiably that led them to proceed to their second structure. Oh. So those actions, Norris argued, were not consistent with reasonable efforts to ascertain and identify the place intended to be searched, obviously. But last month, his civil rights lawsuit was blocked when the 11th Circuit U.S. Court of Appeals ruled that the captain was entitled to qualified immunity as well, citing a 2019 ruling where the 11th Circuit upheld qualified immunity to a deputy who accidentally shot a 10-year-old while aiming for their family's dog. Yeah.
I think, we're in an environment now with the war on drugs. So people need to understand, first of all, the war on drugs is not really drugs per se. I mean, that's the guise that it's a deceptive framework. They call it one thing, but it's really a front for, yeah, exactly. So it's like, and you have to look at, when did this come in? When did this start? So, we often at S4A will talk about the sort of overall progression from like late 19th century, early 20th century. Basically, we had totally unregulated free market capitalism, robber barons, the Gilded Age, like all that massive inequality, like kids working in coal mines, all that kind of stuff. And then there was a big, big struggle in the early 20th century. In some countries like Russia, there was a socialist revolution, but even in countries where, those efforts by workers fell short of a full-on revolution, we at least had a strong labor movement, and this ushered in the period of social democracy where, in countries like the US, the capitalists stayed in power, but they set up a conciliatory framework for concessions and regulations and things like that, where there was some people had basically fought for some more rights within the system, that we would outlaw child labor and other things. And to a certain extent, this just kind of helped capitalism to be more efficient. But I mean, the reality is that people got, honestly, like a better deal out of this. We really did have more rights. This goes on for a while from like, the New Deal itself was more in the 1930s, but even prior to that, there were various reforms in the teens and 20s. But you get this kind of golden age of social democracy in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s. And, even then, I mean, there are a lot of holes in it, to say the least. But, I mean, still, it was better than it was today in many ways. Then what happens? So we go from totally unregulated capitalism to the social democracy, and then the neoliberal turn. Around like early 70s, there's a consensus in the ruling class of the US that, hey, we got to crack down. We got to roll back all this social democracy. We got to roll back these rights. We got to take all this public stuff and privatize it. Then we got to deregulate. So, I like to say that they would privatize, deregulate, and defund. Like whatever couldn't be fully privatized, they would just at least reduce the funding for it. So now we're several decades into this, and it's austerity, it's a police surveillance state. And so the war on drugs I see as part and parcel of that neoliberal push to crack down on everything. And, it started getting a lot of attention in the 1990s where it got, some of this framework started being tested in the late 70s and the 80s, but it really started picking up pace and momentum in the 90s. In the 2000s, of course, things like Department of Homeland Security gets set up that didn't exist before under the war on terror frame. So it's all these the war on drugs, the war on terror. They're frameworks for basically the ruling class hunkering down and turning up the heat and making an environment of just more brutal it's fascization. It's building the transition into fascism essentially, and that's I mean I don't know how else you can really describe objectively what's going on right now with qualified immunity, no-knock warrants, which are just dangerous for literally everyone involved, including even police sometimes. There's just so many better ways to handle it, but we're getting this brutality, which has been building. It's economic, it's judicial, it's kind of across the board.
Right. You're exactly right. Yeah, I think it is like, you know, when capitalism is kind of being threatened even a little, it reverts into, fascistic type tendencies. So,
Yeah, this is I think unquestionably where we're at. So you get the war on drugs, which is ostensibly about drugs. Really though, it's more about criminalizing
people.
it's criminalizing the habits of recreational habits of people.
Right.
Don't get me wrong, like there's definitely, very some drugs can be cause like an enormous amount of damage, other ones not so much to a person's life. But it's more about saying, like, and this started back in like the Nixon years. Well, I
Right.
can't just throw my political enemies in jail, but I can criminalize some of their habits. So what do? Let's make that illegal. This
Yeah.
was basically admitted.
Right. Exactly. So, yeah, with qualified immunity providing such a broad shield, Norris could only prevail if he showed that Captain Cody's actions during the raid, not commanding his team to stop heading towards Norris's home and then following his team into Norris's home, violated the law clearly established in previous decisions. Because the team had announced their presence with flash grenades, they were especially limited in their ability to respond, the court noted, and our precedent allows some latitude for such an honest mistake made by officers in the dangerous and difficult process of making arrests and executing search warrants. Although the 11th Circuit Court acknowledged that the mistaken raid of Norris's home was no doubt traumatic, it nevertheless held that Norris failed to meet his burden to show that Captain Cody violated clearly established law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so now we're in a place where you can say, okay, well this is, fine, highfalutin theory of what's been going on over the last century in the development of capitalism, but what does this have to do specifically with Onree Norris? What does it have to do with Vicki Baker? What does it have to do with Leo Lech in Colorado? And the answer is nothing.
Nothing.
It didn't have it didn't have anything to do with them personally. This is just the system now.
Yep.
And people need to care about it because it's not this is just the system that they have set up. This is the tone, and this is how the people who own and rule this country have decided they're
Exactly.
going to maintain power and administrate the system.
Because all of
And
these people are innocent. Like Henry,
exactly.
Henry did nothing. Vicky did nothing. Leo did nothing. They absolutely did fucking nothing to have this happen to them. And so, if this can happen to, like they always say, well, don't do anything wrong. These people weren't doing
Right.
anything wrong. And they still got fucked over by this system. you know? Many fucking people die because of this type of stuff. These no-knock warrants, uh, these you don't even know where you're going warrants, you know? Like I
Yeah.
saw this video the other day on TikTok. This woman was telling her story. She was asked to be let in. You know, this man asked her, "Oh, can you let me into the building?" She let him in. She opened the door for him. And who follows? A whole fucking SWAT team. She opened the door for the SWAT team to just go in the fucking and SWAT her neighbor. Like,
Hmm.
first of all, why would you do that? But like, second of all, how are they allowed to just do that? Like,
Well, I think the bottom line is they're allowed to do virtually anything.
anything.
And the way that the police always want to handle it is internally, the I word. This is how, any kind of cult, any sort of like, that's, it's handle it internally, no transparency, like, again, no
Mm-hmm.
real external accountability, anything like that. Well, we'll just handle it ourselves. So, I mean, there's very simple ways you could start moving in a more positive direction with this, with like functioning community oversight of police.
Oh
Like there's
yeah,
efforts
community
to that
oversight
extent.
boards. That would be nice.
I mean, and even then they're gonna try to fuck you, but
Oh yeah.
like
Oh yeah. Do you
it's
see
still
that
it,
in LA they have a community oversight board and now they're prosecuting? They have arrested and like all the community oversight board members. They arrested them and they
did
like
not see
took
that.
away their yeah. Oh yeah. The LAPD arrested the community oversight board and took away their like work computers. So
Okay,
that was
so there you
cool.
go. I mean, it's like it's like after 1905 when the Tsar was finally like convinced, all right, fine, I'll set up the parliament for you like squawking protesters, but you're not gonna have a binding vote. And it's like, okay, but yeah, I mean, this is just like a principle throughout time is it's not to say that there's no value to it at all. I mean, we have to do everything that we can in the short term to try to wrest some accountability back. The bottom line is this system needs to go. So
Right.
what we're trying to do with those reforms is to buy ourselves a bit more time. You know, if without these things, somebody, if you could have a crystal ball into the future and events were going to play out where somebody was going to get, shot and killed by a cop 2 years from now, if you can stretch that out through reforms and like making the system different to 5 years, okay, I mean, the system's still there, it's moving more slowly, but we have to get rid of the system. And I think that this is like a foreign concept to people at this point of like, we've seen how hard this system, post 2008 capitalism, especially, is coming down on us. And I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people who, we have a poor culture of protest in the US. We have a poor culture of political resistance. It's just not very robust or strong. We're still rebuilding organizations that we should have been building across decades, but we allowed to fall into disrepair. I think people are bewildered about like, you mean we have to actually get rid of the system? Yeah, we do, because
Mm-hmm.
we need to get the reforms that we can get. There are, for example, efforts to get no-knock warrants, banned, which they are in several states. There's currently 7 states where they're banned. 9 states have some limitations. One state has a moratorium, but the majority of states, 34 states, have very few restrictions on them. I want to mention also, if you're interested in stuff like that, endallnoknocks.org, bannoknocks.change.org, and policymovement.org/no-knock-warrants. There's like, if you just search on like movement to end no-knock warrants, you'll find there's a lot of people working on this.
I'll put these
That's
in the
one thing.
description as well. So,
Okay, yeah. There's people working on qualified immunity. We need to fight for these things in the short term because it will slow down and reduce the number of people getting hurt
murdered.
and injured by this. But the bottom line is we need to get rid of the system, and I think there's a lot of
Right.
people still struggling with that concept.
There is life before capitalism, and there's gonna be life after it. We just have to get there. We have to abolish the system. We have to change it. It's not working for people, and we need something new. Time to try something new.
And when you say like we need to abolish the system, people are trained by so many different ways, in the media and stuff. They're trained to hear that as like just a joke, like that's sort of a punchline of like, oh, look at the, in whatever it is, look at the extreme, laughably extreme character saying that.
What I
No,
think
what
is
you said is true.
extreme is being able to be murdered in your home while doing
Absolutely.
nothing wrong. That's extreme by people who are supposed to protect and serve us. I don't want to live
Yeah.
in this place anymore. That if that can happen.
Yeah, I mean, and as you mentioned in the intro, like this is the convergence of so many things. It's no knox, it's qualified immunity. Let's talk about just people's safety during wellness checks. So there's
Oh
a
my
case
God, yeah.
where today, one of the scummiest cops ever, just my impression of him from looking at the video, Aaron Dean was just sentenced to found guilty. Well, I don't forget what the sentence is, but he was found guilty of manslaughter today after a neighbor of a Tatiana Jefferson was
Mm.
the sixth person in a 5 month span to be killed by the police in this area. Which is, how do you not see that there's a problem there? Anyway, her
Right.
front door, her front door was open. And one of her neighbors was like, oh, her front door is like ajar. I'm kind of worried about it. And they interviewed the guy who called the cops. He feels really bad about it. He feels guilty. Like, yeah, he could have just gone over and like checked, but maybe he feared that maybe there was an intruder in the house. He didn't want to get hurt. Anyway, he called the police to say, hey, my neighbor's door is just like hanging open. Not sure I would have done that myself, but he did. And again, he clearly is like pretty feels very guilty about it. But anyway, he called the police. He's like, "Can you check on my neighbor? I want to make sure she's okay." So they send over this cop, Aaron Dean. He starts. You can see the body cam footage. He's sneaking around in the backyard, and he winds up shooting this woman who's completely fine. She's had the front door open for some reason. She was with her, I think, 8-year-old nephew. They were playing video games, and the cop shot her during this wellness check. It was over in like a second.
A
And so,
wellness check.
wellness check.
You go and you fucking kill them for the wellness check.
Yeah, because she had a gun. She was in her house. That was her right. The
Yes, you're
cop
allowed to
just,
have your a gun in your own home. Is this not America? Like, what the fuck?
and she sees some random shape slinking around in her backyard, which the cop didn't just go to the. He goes to the front door, peeks in, then goes around the house. I think he was in the backyard at the time. She sees somebody slinking around in her backyard. She gets her gun, and I'm pretty sure he shot her like through the window. So that's the kind of thing that is going. Now that guy, I think possibly post, Derek Chauvin,
Mm.
like, we're having some more high profile moments at this point. By and large, though, the system is still going on. So, okay,
Yeah,
you
I
had
really
another case here
appreciate
where the
like
guy,
Indiana has done. They said it is now legal to shoot cops if they are trying to enter your house illegally. And I think let the games begin, sirs. If you
well,
fucking, like don't be messing around with people. If you like, ugh, I can't even get into it. Go ahead.
yeah, well, and it's like, so at that point, if the police don't change their tactics, we just get a war zone.
Yeah.
Which is conducive to no. I mean, the cops are there. Why? I mean, possibly because they may be enthusiastic about it if they're like Nazis, because we know many people in law enforcement tend to be like influenced by some kind of white supremacist
What is it?
extremist thinking and cops and Klan.
Most of
Some of
those
those that
who wait, what is the thing? Some of those who work
work
forces
forces are the same that burn
burn
crosses.
crosses.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's the one.
that's very true. There's a great book by a guy, Christian Williams, I think, called Our Enemies in Blue. That's a history of policing in the US. And
Mm.
it's like the overlap at certain periods in time between police membership and KKK membership was like enormous, like especially in some areas like the Pacific Northwest. But it's like, okay, they're maybe ideologically invested in it. Like, yeah, I'm gonna get to shoot some minorities. But at the end of the day, like they are there for a paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
They may, take some special like white pride in it to boot, but like they're there for a paycheck. I can't imagine that they're just like that eager to. Yeah. Anyway, we need a change to this unless we just want everything to be engulfed in not even a purposeful war zone, but just random violence with
Mm-hmm.
no particular point as an ongoing way of life. That seems to be where this is headed.
Yeah, they like really just want the Wild West to come back. They just want America to be just a shooting ground.
Yeah, I think if people need to get that, this will not affect the very richest in the same way. There are
Right.
certain neighborhoods they would never pull this shit in. And they really can sort of buy exemptions. They can buy their way out of it.
Yeah.
And you need to know, if you're not one of those people, if you're truly not in the
And
1%,
most of us
this
aren't.
this affects you. Oh, yeah, well, 99% of us, in
Yeah.
fact. Uh, so yeah, I mean, to say the least. And yeah, I think some people are under the mistaken impression that they're immune to this, but isn't that the thing that we always hear from like conservatives, people who unless it happens to them personally, it just doesn't exist.
Right.
It doesn't matter. It happened to somebody else. They must have deserved it, this and that. But what we're actually look through the videos, these are completely everyday, law abiding. These are not communist revolutionaries. These are totally normal people going about their day, productive members of society. And oh, turns out that a criminal used to live in your house 3 years ago, and therefore we're going to storm in at 3 a.m.
Yeah.
And you just don't know if it's so. Again, I know a lot of people are averse to the idea. Uh, for one thing, just logistically, how do you do it of like abolishing capitalism? But it's got to be done
And it can be
because
done.
yeah, it can be done, but they're not going to stop doing this. They're not going to stop.
No.
And you don't want to find out firsthand. You like learn the easy way. You don't have to learn this the hard
Learn
way.
from our story, not from it
Yeah.
personally happening to you.
Yeah, don't be so thick that like, you're like, I didn't think it was real till it happened to me. I mean,
Right.
it happens to everybody to some extent, but like there's some things where the hard way is too hard and you might not come out of it like that. There was an easier way and the price is going to be way too steep
Mm,
by the time you actually get the lesson.
absolutely.
God, and can I just add,
Sure.
also, for all the people doing that, dragging their feet, we were talking about this a bit before the show, it's just like it makes it so much harder, for the rest of us who are fighting for your best interests. Random people out there listening to this who maybe aren't, deeply convinced of the urgency of this. We're trying to help you, and all that foot dragging and all that disbelief and all that denial and all that doubt. Uh, God, it doesn't make it easier for us, and ultimately not for you either. You know, it's uh, it's frustrating.
Yeah. So the last thing I really like to do is talk about where are they now um, with the cops. So Captain Cody retired. David Lamax still working as a sergeant at Henry County Police. Stephen Parrish is a police investigator, and I like that sometimes it says their wages. So that guy was making $24 an hour to do that. Jerome Moore, who these are just some of the officers who are involved. Um, he's a sheriff sergeant, and he's making $28 an hour. And so yeah, that's just who I could find who is still active. Yeah, all these people are still working as police officers, still ready and eager to fucking break your door down for no goddamn reason.
Mhm.
So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and that is, I think, more often the case. Again, it's, like we mentioned cults before, something like where you see the church scandals where they become aware of, some kind of abuse. It's usually like sexual abuse. And then they just sort of move the person around. They move
Oh
them to
yeah.
another district. And that's a lot of the same thing that happens with these cops, although, I mean, sometimes it's like sexual abuse or assault with a cop, but I mean, a lot of times it's non-sexual violence.
Oh my
with the
God.
cops, and they just get hired somewhere else.
In the case of what was his name? Shoot, I forget his name. The guy I did the first episode on. Shoot, LA cop. Well, in the case of that, all of his upper cops, like the lieutenants, the sergeants, etc., those people, some of them they were promoted so much they are in the White House. They're like White House commissioners and like stuff. It's disgusting. Lori Lightfoot
Yeah,
is like making them Chicago police commissioner. Like
yeah,
all those
she's
people
been.
got like elevated to all hell.
I think that's what people need to understand is like that is by and large the norm with these cases. So you'll occasionally see a Derek Chauvin, get actually charged with something, or you'll occasionally see an Aaron Dean get charged with something. By and large, though, we can't be fighting, and this I think is the big takeaway that people should have. We can't be fighting these cases on an individual basis anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We need to take it on as the system it is. It's not bad apples. It's the overall judicial consensus about how to handle qualified immunity and where and how to apply it. It's
Absolutely.
the practice of no-knock warrants in 3 dozen states or more. It is a system, and we can't be fighting, on a case-by-case basis. We have to fight it on a system basis.
Absolutely. So on the for the next time, I think S4A is going to come back and we will talk about um, the Golden State Killer because I don't know if you all know, but he was a cop. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that was a case. We'll see how it shakes out, but that was a case that stood out to me where it's this serial killer finally gets unmasked and it was actually a cop. So
yeah, and that took like what did it take like 50 years something?
oh, it was a long. Yeah, it was like I think 40 because I think those that
Yeah.
was in the 70s and he got caught in the 2010s.
Mm,
He was old. Yeah, he was like in his late 70s I think at the time, but he got caught.
yeah. Okay. Well, Socialism for All. Please give all your information to the
All
audience.
right, I'll give it a plug. So youtube.com/socialism, FORALL. That's the main page. We're also on Twitter, twitter.com at socialism S4A. And those are kind of the two, like, I'm on Reddit too, but that's kind of just for like posting the links over. So yeah, YouTube and Twitter. And on the YouTube, we do videos of, well, Marxist theory and history that I help to give some context and comments on. So it's digestible and maybe applicable to the present. We also do live streams and current events commentary there. And then on Twitter, it's the free for all that Twitter is, just, this current events and thoughts and whatever else comes up.
Yes, I really enjoy getting my news from Socialism for All, and also his wonderful voice is excellent for reading audiobooks. One of my favorite readers on YouTube, so I really highly recommend checking them out. Thanks for
Well,
being here
thank you.
with us today.
My pleasure.
Yes. Okay, I don't know how to end this thing.
I think we just
Okay, cool. Love you, bye. Okay, cool. Love you, bye. Not you, them.
I know.